Well, Bruce, it's an honour. Really.
Charlie, I am honoured by your interest in this. That's what the whole story is this is such a great story for the world.
Very much. Well, I have a little magazine called Aha. And actually, you're a great friend of yours. I contacted Steve Berman.
Oh, yeah.
And I used a couple of his, Ask the Swami funnies.
Yeah.
But thank you for all the work that you've done.
I appreciate that, and I also have to recognize the fact that I had to educate myself. So the way I wrote it was essentially the way I had to, it wasn't like I'm some super brain and I figured it out. I had to work on it and then bring it down to a place that I can understand it.
Yeah.
And when I said, if I can understand it, anybody can understand it. So I'm very happy that it's worked out that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And rather than going into all of your back catalogue now, what I'll do is I'll put up that a little bit on the front of the video so people can get a little bit more of the background and they can dip into many clips on YouTube. But of course, you're best known as as a cell biologist who did this pioneering work to help us understand the workings of genes. You're doing stem cell research years and years ago before people
even knew what stem cells. There's only a handful of us in the entire world. I mean, maybe 10 people even when I started with stem cells in 1967 that were really familiar with stem cells. So I was in a very unique place to have a unique opportunity with a wonderful professor, teacher, almost father figure for me, Erwin Koningsberg, who was a developer of a cloning technique.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, fundamentally, I suppose what you really told us, and actually, which is very radical at the time, was that our genes are not our destiny.
Yes.
And must have been extraordinary to come out with this. But at the same time, for us now, it's all very liberating.
Well, it was liberating to my sense of myself enough that I walked out of the university with tenure. I had tenure and just said, I'm teaching incorrect information to medical students. I cannot continue doing this. And my stuff, of course, wasn't in any books, so it was just my word that I wasn't, that I was teaching stuff that they should know.
Yeah, yeah. When you started writing, there wasn't even the term epigenetics, really.
No, 1990.
It was an idea.
Yeah.
Which you sort of formulated and put down.
That's why there's no word epigenetics in the original book, because there wasn't even epigenetics at that time. So,
are you encouraged by the way the debate's going?
Yeah, but I also see there's this conflict and tension between the existing money, like pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
Because of the money is power, and they wield the power that's like, oh my God, compared to all of us that don't have the money. Yeah. And it's really an unfair situation, but
this is something that Vandana Shiva talks about, and I'm sure and Jane Goodall it is this power structures that still need to dissolve.
Absolutely.
Before
it's inevitable, and maybe even by the time this magazine comes out, there might be a global upheaval in the making at this moment. So it's like from one day to the next at this time, it's going to be like, wow, you're going to...
Because I thought, because we're in the surroundings of, and the resurgence is all about the environment and nature today, rather than go back, this well-trodden path with all your work with cell biology and so on, I wanted to angle it towards the environment and nature, if that's okay.
Yes.
And one of the things you said was crisis precipitates evolution.
Yes.
And I just wondered whether you could speak a little bit about that.
Sometimes we really know things that we should be doing. And yet it's like, oh, it's not convenient to do so at this point. And everything is working, so just leave it alone, but I'll keep it back here in my head, And then you hit a wall, you hit a crisis, and the crisis says you cannot continue in this direction anymore, you must make a change. And this is when most people finally say, okay, now I'm ready to change. Even though they may have known that where they were going and what they were doing wasn't necessarily suitable for humanity, not until the wall stops them. Because it's, hey, if everything's flowing smoothly, keep flowing. But when it stops flowing, then you got to do something different.
So we've now entered, as you talk about, the sixth
mass extinction.
Yeah. And it's the Anthropocene, I think, isn't it? We've moved into the Anthropocene. So
absolutely. And this becomes, to me, to watch it and to be a cell biologist and then to watch what we're doing out here is like, oh my goodness, this is so completely wrong, and it's fun for me because I now work with Native American and First Nation people in Canada, Aboriginals, whose original philosophy was what we need to go back to right now.
So back to the future, the way we need to kind of...
And absolutely, because they were living it. They lived in a garden knowing they were living in a garden. Yeah. And I can imagine, and maybe not fully, the experience that these natives had when, like, the white people came, and they killed thousands of buffalo, just took the skin off, and left all of it there, and to the Indians, there was not one piece of leftover buffalo. After they killed one buffalo, everything was used. Yeah. To see fields of slaughtered animals rotting in a field, for them was unbelievable.
You talk about the opportunity, really, of millennials now, don't you?
Yes, this is the millennial generation is the pivotal generation of this whole evolutionary movement. And most interestingly, they're the generation that has no concept of what's actually going on. They don't even know their own role in what's going on. And that's the exciting part, because they're all going, oh, I can't get a job, and I have to live with 4 others because I don't make enough money, and I got student loans that I'll never be able to pay back, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And the fact is, every one of these things is the motivation for the evolution. And what I really say to people is like...
Is it the grit in the oyster in a way, isn't it?
What's that?
It's the grit in the oyster.
Yeah, it is.
It's something that kind of...
Here's a simple principle. A government can only stand as long as people support it. Yeah. You talk about the millennial generation, they're not included in anything that the government is doing. They're, outside of everything, and they're bemoaning the fact that they're outside. And for me, it's like, no. You're such a large population outside that there's less people holding up the existing government. Yeah. And as the millennials, start to increase the proportion of the population, they have no connection to this government. They don't really care. They have their own world community. Millennial generations are also profoundly different in this regard. Before millennial generation, we were local people. You knew what was going on locally and who the local was, and I live in the state and I know what's going on in my state. But the millennials grew up with computers and internet. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, this generation is a global generation. They communicate across the world everywhere. So there are no barriers as the older people have for the younger generation, because they don't see a wall between them and anybody else. The computers open that up. I communicate with anybody anywhere.
Technologies and so on.
Yeah.
I just interviewed a couple of Aussie surfers the other day who've come up with this new way of collecting plastic, in the oceans, and they're great, and so hopefully those sort of people, in their 20s, will be the sort of people who will kind of get students together. They'll kind of resonate.
That millennial age group starts to recognize that they have abilities and they have powers, and even though they've been suppressed by a conventional economic system, it's like, but they start to get in their own community and say, wow, look what these people are doing. Look what these other, they're creating new. Yes. That's where...
And this is their battle for their generation, really, isn't it? This is their...
They have to come together themselves first. Yeah. And so bringing them together, and especially where they're coming from. Where are they coming from? They're coming from, woe with me. Woe is like, oh my God, my life sucks here, And it's like, no, yeah, but if you come over here, we can do something completely different.
Are you though quite hopeful? I mean, there must be younger people now being drawn to your talks and your lectures.
Well, I don't know if they're necessarily drawn to it, but I've seen them make movements toward raising their own consciousness and making their own community and supporting each other, because they're not getting support from anywhere else. So they find support among their own community, which is what builds up to the bigger level. And they're outside of the other structure, and the other structure is destructive, is the nicest term I might add, and it really means we cannot survive with that anymore. And now we have this other massive generation that doesn't even connect to it. What I like to always say is, I say, you tell a millennial, you say, hey, the stock market's going to crash, and they go, like I own a stock, right? And then all of a sudden you realize they don't care. They're not connected to that structure, and that is the only way to create the new one. The other one collapses, and the new one is going to replace it.
Yes.
Collapse is necessary.
Yeah.
And this is really, if there was a message I would offer, is people are in fear of this thing falling apart, and it's like, you know, they see it not working. Economy, climate change, fuel issues, food crisis, health crisis, and the beautiful part about that is, if we sustain what we have, we only exacerbate every one of these problems because they come from our culture right now. So the only way out is to drop the existing culture and build a new one. Well, that's like birth, and it is birth. And you know, in birth, there's a little pain, there's a little bloodshed.
Yeah.
But if you don't do it, we're doomed. I remember very much the so-called hippie days when in the States we were protesting the Vietnam War. And there was such an enthusiasm of change.
It's kind of galvanizing of everything.
Yeah, you'd wake up every day knowing today something's going to happen, because that movement, every day something was going to happen. And it was like so exciting to wake up in an age of movement.
Yeah.
But then the problem was after the protests and all that and the war ends, who are your protesters? Well, they're the people that are looking for a job, and they have no power. And so they got incorporated into the structure, and it seems that it disappeared. But I know it's in there somewhere, and it just will take that moment of galvanization to bring them back out. And they've already been seeded with this idea. They just are not exercising it.
Yes. It's sometimes it's difficult to know how to take that next step, isn't it?
Except when it's made for you.
Yes.
And I think that's the issue. That's what the crises are all about. The crises are, look, it's not your making, but you're going to have to deal with it, and that means you're going to have to move. We're going to do something.
What excites you now? What do you enjoy most? I mean, is it going around still giving lectures and talks to people who haven't heard? Still, this material is still new to a lot of people, isn't it?
It is. It's really just trying to wake people up to their own power. And I love my job, because I go out there and what's my job? I stand in front of people and say, you are so powerful, and you don't know it. So let's open up and express your power. Because when the people express their power, then the whole world is going to shift differently, because we have such a small percent of people making the decisions for everybody for their own benefit. Yeah. And a large number of people, if you gave them an opportunity to say, what would you want? Average Joe on the street, what do you want? They all want the same thing. Yeah. There's a mass amount of people that want, just give me some peace, give me some work to do, give me a place to live safely and some food. And that's all they really, they'll make their community. And the idea is, wow, so if I gave the power to the 90-some% of the people and say, create what you want, the unity of that creation will be the most beautiful planet, because everybody wants heaven. They just want to live that way.
Yes. So you're hopeful. You seem to be a very hopeful, optimistic sort of person. You always had a lot of energy. And
Because I lived one way, and I've changed my life. And this is what, sort of like, look, if you do change, look at what the consequences, how healthy you can be. You don't, sickness, 1% of disease is due to genetics. 1%. Yeah. Where's all the rest coming from? Stress. Yeah. And stress of what? The life that people are creating, which is disempowering, because they know stress disempowers.
This sort of events, I'm sure you go to many events, but these sort of events sort of create their own sort of field, don't they? When you talk about the signal, and so almost it's creating an environment where people can come together, share ideas.
Every time we do that, there's a stronger vibration. So it's adding it's an amplification. When every individual just joins in this community, they amplify. Yeah. And what we need now are enough speakers, amplifiers around to bring everybody in together. So the more that people speak up, the more this becomes part of the field, which is the environment, the energy that we live in. We're generating a new energy. Yeah. And it's an energy that says we can thrive, but not as individual competitors in a Darwinian struggle for survival and a competition for fitness.
I've heard that expression is nice, isn't it?
And so we changed this whole idea, because it's evolution. There's some competition, but not the competition that we live with today. Because the original term competition was to strive together. In other words, if I'm a tennis player, which I'm not, but if I was, I could play people who are less capable than me and beat them every time. Or play the one who's better than me so I can get better. Because if I play the weaker one, I don't gain anything. Yeah. So when I'm playing in a match, I'm competing, but it's for my advancement. Not so much I take down the other guy, but it's for me to do better. Yeah. So the idea of competition, as we've been using it, is the most destructive element in the world, because it says, I care about me and I don't care about you. And this is like, oh my God, this is antagonistic completely to, it only works when we come together as a community.
Right. So it's up to us really to accentuate the positive, to promote the solution-based ideas and the people who are, giving us this message of
right. Yeah. We're in a stage of what's called emergence. And emergence is a real interesting topic because it has, something is coming out of something. And I go, well, it's more than that. It's an understanding of this, is that, here's a point. If, let's say you and I are cave people sitting around a fire that we fortunately found, and we could sit there, and I say, hey, Charlie, let's build a rocket ship to the moon. And we have a couple of issues right now. The first thing is, what's the moon? And what the hell is a rocket ship? Yeah. And the reality is, two people sitting around a campfire will never be able to resolve this. And about 30,000 years ago, the density of the population started to come up to a level where the interaction between people was great, enough to take an idea and have individuals contribute a piece. But if they're all separated, it doesn't work. Yeah. And so about 30,000 years ago, when we reached that density level, and now if you look at technology, it's like this slope that's almost going straight up. And the idea about that is it takes numbers of people to collaborate. A number that comes to, interestingly, is to make a computer, 50,000 individual ideas from individuals was required to assemble a computer, to come to that. If you don't have 50,000 people connected in one way or another, there's no computer, period. And so we are reaching a density where the technology, the ideas are popping out because of the numbers of people sharing information. And emergence means you can study the pieces but never understand what it could be. Yeah. So in other words, we can study resistors and transistors and capacitors and all these other aspects of electronics. I say, well, here they are on the table. I say, oh, that's nice. This does this and this does that. And I say, well, so? I say, not until somebody put the pieces together and made something out of it, that was an emergence. In other words, we can study all the pieces. Everybody knows what every piece does. But that's not the TV, the radio, the computer. That was the assembly. And therefore, what we're seeing right now is the people are the pieces. We're studying things, but the emergence is when you come together anew.
There's sort of a unity in diversity, isn't there? Because you need all the disparate parts.
Absolutely. Every vision is important in the whole piece. And that's why the idea of eliminating people from your population is like, man, look, the United States, when it was founded, was the most unique country in the world for this. Every country up until that time was like a culture dish with its own cells. Yeah. And they reproduce in there. The Swiss reproduce in their little dish. The Germans reproduce in their little dish. They keep their ideas isolated from everybody else because they have borders. Yeah. The United States brought everybody from all these different cultures together. And that created a collaboration of ideas that would have been completely separated in each country, and nobody would have put them together. It wouldn't have gone anywhere. Yeah. The U.S. was hybrid. Yeah. And that's where the power came from. And this is what the power is. Take the same thing. The U.S. was a small model, but it was a global civilization. Why? Because everybody came from around the globe. So it was an example.
Gravitated there. It became a human experiment.
It is, and it says, well, look what it did at this level. What do you think would happen if the whole globe became that? Yeah. And it's like, there are limits. You will never know what the limits are. There are no limits at that point. Yeah. Yeah. Aha!
Thank you, Bruce. Any other final words? Because I know you've very generously given your time and you've got an interview coming up. So I just wanted to if you had one message for your AHA readers, and they're going to be watching this and going, okay, I'm sort of fired up now. How do people what would you suggest people do to get involved locally? They need to get involved.
The reason why we as people don't have any power is because those in control know that if you break up community, there is no power. And all community has been broken up, and down to the point of even breaking the family community up. That means there is no power. And the only way you're going to bring power back is when people come together. When people collectively stand together, it's the only time any change has ever occurred. So the idea is we can have two outlooks at this moment. I could go there and go, oh, Jesus, this thing is falling apart. I'm going to go protect myself. I'm going to go live in a hole. I'm going to get all the toys, put them in my hole. I'm going to live this way. Which is then death, because now you walled yourself off. Or say, I need to find another way of communicating, community, working with each other, sharing, support by each other, and all of a sudden you're not a lone person. The anathema in my vision is a homeless person on a street. Yeah. How can a person be homeless? You mean there was no family? There was nobody that individual knew that said, look...
No support system.
And that's a symptom of what? No community.
Yeah.
And when there's community, there are no homeless people.
Yeah.
So I think it's basically recognizing it's time to join together. And it's interesting because in Australia, some friends that I know have put together something called the Conscious Club. Mm-hmm. And all these young, 20-something-year-old people would gather every weekend and drink and take drugs and party and rave and do all this kind of stuff. And at some point they said, it's like another weekend, another wasted weekend, because at the end, nothing. We didn't get anything out of it. I mean, we had a moment of joy and then back to the world again. And Conscious Club was really cool because it was a seed that said, wait, a lot of young people got together and said, hey, why don't we get together and have potluck dinner? Everybody brings stuff. And it started out small. Yeah. Now they have 1,000, 2,000 people come, and in addition to sharing at that moment, they provide a presentation of something that enhances the lives of all those people. It's raising consciousness. Yeah. And that, to me, is, that's the direction that you really want your community to go in.
Yes.
And because evolution is not the evolution of our physical biology, it's the evolution of consciousness. That's an easier evolution than physically changing the body.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Bruce. That's a lovely note to end on, and I really
that's it.
Really appreciate. Well,
oh man,
I don't know whether.